little bit. And then when she's finished, we're going to hand over to you. Okay, this is mostly because as a teacher of English, I'm very uncomfortable when I'm talking all the time. I like something to come from my students, or my audience in this case. So, and I know that it can be a bit nerve-wracking to stick your hand up and say something, because again, from my classroom experience, I know that. So, we're telling you now, so that you can start thinking of some really good questions, and if you want to get into pairs with a partner and come up with the questions, that's good as well. So we'll give you, I don't know, the next half hour, I expect, while this interview goes on. And then we turn the spotlight on you guys, and you better have some really good questions, okay? All right, great.
Okay, don't make your answers like extremely long, because otherwise I will only have time for two.
Okay, all right.
I mean, don't go telegraphic with me or anything. Good afternoon. I think we're ready to begin. Yeah? Okay. So my name is Sara Martín Alegre, and I will be interviewing Richard Morgan, and it's a very great pleasure for me to have the chance to interview him here at Eurocon. And you need to bear with me because I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs of introduction. I know that most of you already know who Richard is, but there might be someone here who doesn't. Okay, so just let me read. So Richard Morgan, born in London in 1965 and also known as Richard K. Morgan in the United States, is best known for the Takeshi Kovacs trilogy, Altered Carbon, published in 2002, and a Philip K. Dick Award winner, Broken Angels of 2003, and Woken Furies of 2005. His other science fiction novels are Market Forces of 2004, a John W. Campbell Memorial winner, and in my view, his most accomplished work to date, Black Man, published in 2007 and an Arthur C. Clarke Award winner, which was published as 13 in America, I suppose that for reasons of political correctness. Morgan is also the author of the fantasy trilogy with the ironic title, A Land Fit for Heroes, consisting of The Still Remains, published in 2008, and a Gay Lactic Spectrum Award winner, The Cold Commands of 2011, and The Dark Defiles of 2014. He has written the scripts for the graphic novels Black Widow, Homecoming, Black Widow, The Things They Say About Her, and Crisis, and also for the video games Crisis 2, Syndicate, and A Land Fit for Heroes. And I think this is it about the list of works. Now, Richard has a degree in history from Queen's College in Cambridge, and as he's told you, despite an early vocation to become a teacher, he could only end up his 14-year-old career as an English language teacher in Turkey, Spain, and Scotland, thanks to the phenomenal success of Altered Carbon. Morgan, I'm warning you, speaks Spanish fluently and has traveled extensively in the Americas, Africa, and Australia. Currently, he lives in England, near the place where he grew up, with his Spanish wife, Virginia, and their son, Daniel. And Morgan's popularity, with this I'll finish, among science fiction and fantasy fans may soon zoom due to the 10-episode series based on Altered Carbon, which Laeta Kalogridis is developing for Netflix, a project in which Morgan is participating as screenwriter, okay? I'm warning you that I'm not going to ask specific questions about the specific works in case that's the kind of question you want to ask later, okay? So, very simply, what is your motivation to write?
I think rage, basically. There are other things, you know. I mean, it's very hard to pick apart the various reasons that you sit down to write something, and then the other various reasons that you continue working on it until it becomes something worth keeping. But if I look back at the things that have really kicked my ass and made me sit down and try and produce something, they're mostly connected with anger. They're mostly connected with rage. I think probably I'm a little bit like Ian Fleming, who apparently was advised to write the James Bond novels as therapy. And I think that's probably what happened, certainly with the early Kovacs novels. They were a kind of therapy for the fact that I'd had to be a kind of a hippie English language teacher for 14 years. And it's a profession that requires hippie-like tendencies, otherwise it doesn't work. So it's not that I'm castigating the method, I'm not. It does work. But you have to demolish authority roles in the classroom in order for to get your students to speak English. And the problem is that that's something you can do, but there are always going to be a couple of assholes out there who misconstrue this as weakness. And the real problem with the profession is that you can't kill those people. It's a significant defect in how things work in EFL. And so yes, I spent a long time, about 14 years in all, having to deal with these guys. I know that wasn't even a small majority of my students. It was not even a large minority, in fact. But there were always some. Every class has an asshole, and like I said, you can't kill these people, so you have to sort of aguantar. You've got to put up with them. And I think in all that time, the character of Takeshi Kovacs kind of dripped out of me like the oil coming out of a crack in the sump of a car, and it was really dark, viscous, nasty stuff, because that's a guy who'll kill you as soon as look at you if you say the wrong thing, you know. And I think, yeah, it's probably a good thing I don't live in a country where you can buy guns easily.
Yeah. I don't know what to think when you say this, because I'm a foreign learner of English, and you scare me very much when you say this. Okay, but here's my next question. Do you care for awards or for appearing in the non-academic and academic histories of science fiction, or is making a living of writing reward enough?
It's really nice to get awards. But it's even nicer to have a lot of money. And I've been very lucky in the sense that because of the various film deals and then getting into the movie industry, the video gaming industry, I've actually earned quite a lot of money, most of which hasn't come directly from the royalties of my books. It has been association of things, you know. And I seem to have been very lucky in that, although I don't seem to pull down a huge audience. I mean, probably Brandon Sanderson sells more books in a week than I do in a year. So I don't seem to have that mass appeal. But what I do seem to be able to do is to get to people who themselves are creatives. So I found that I had a huge number of fans in electronic arts and sort of the gaming world. I found I had a lot of fans in the movie business as well. So that I'm getting off the point here. So yeah, that enabled me to make very good money, and I have to say there's something very nice about that.
But you do have a considerable number of awards, and
I have a few. Yeah,
that must matter too, right?
It's very nice. I mean, any kind of validation. Writing is a lonely business, and it tends to be quite one-sided. It's why I like coming to these things, because I finally get to sort of have the other half of the conversation. Mostly you're just writing, you're throwing this into the void, and you're hoping that on the other side is someone who is going to read the book and in some way it will respond to it. So yeah, of course, if someone comes along and says, oh, we've decided we're giving you an award, that's great, because it means that a significant group of people have decided that what you've said is interesting or correct or moves them. So that's great. But if you were asking me to stack up in order of importance what I count on, there is nothing quite like financial security in the service of art. Being secure, knowing that I didn't have to worry about making money from my books, means that I got to write exactly the books I wanted to. And that has, I mean, some of those books have been quite unpopular amongst certain circles. And I would not have liked to have been in a position where each time I sat down to write a book, I was having to think very carefully about which audience I was looking for. You know, could I afford to put this piece in, because if I upset a lot of people, I'm going to lose 10,000 sales somewhere, you know. That's the thing. It sort of harks back to the era of guys like Michelangelo, who had patrons, you know, and it's almost what it feels like, that Hollywood and then the games industry have been my patrons. And having that patronage has enabled me to do what I want. And that is, for any artist, that is the greatest possible gift. Now, awards, with the possible exception of a couple like the Booker Prize, maybe, awards do not do this, because they simply don't generate enough revenue, first of all, at the level of what the award is. I mean, Philip K. Dick Award is paid.
But they give you publicity, don't they?
Yeah, they give you publicity, but not enough to really change your basic sales figures. I say, apart from, there are a few. The Booker Prize, National Book Award in the US, there are certain awards that, yes, they have a very, very big cash prize attached, and then they have a very significant effect on how much you sell. But there aren't many of them. There are one or two, and I would say there aren't any in genre. I think even the Hugo, even if you win the Hugo, it isn't going to make the difference between you being able to afford to eat and not. So I love getting awards. It's very gratifying, but in the end, making money from the writing is I think that's the big goal for me, simply because it gives me the security to go on doing it.
And it's clear to you that science fiction writers should always be professionals. I mean, in your early stages, you combine teaching with writing. And we were having a conversation over lunch, and we were saying, what makes you freer? Combining your writing as a hobby, so to speak, with your profession, or being a professional? Because you say that you have some security, but it must be very, very hard for most writers to depend on the success of their next book.
No, absolutely. And most people in my position, I'm very much a mid-list writer. So I sell quite well. All of my advances are earned out, apart from market forces in the US, but we'll get to that. But all my advances have earned out. I'm earning royalties from every book. But still, had I not had the benefits of Hollywood bestowed upon me at the beginning, it would have been at least another 5 or 6 years before I could even think about giving up my day job.
This is because you sold the rights to Alter Carbon, right?
Yes, the movie deal with Warner Brothers at the beginning was massive, and it gave me, I think they continued renewing the option for about 7 years, and it just gave me a total freedom. That's invaluable.
I think each one of your readers must have the same curiosity I'm going to share with you. I wonder how a working day works for you, because you spend your days fantasizing about distant lands and about guys doing very violent things, and I don't know how, do you work 9 to 5 and then you go back to... No. Okay.
No. It's questions about process are always difficult because I don't really understand how I do this. I've been doing it now for some significant time. I still don't really understand how I do it. You have good days and bad days. You know when you're on and when you're not. Mostly you have to keep going even when you're not on, just because otherwise you would never get the work done. But yeah, I mean, I try to sit down and write every day. Has been very difficult over the last couple of years because of upheavals in life. I've been moving house. My son's going to school for the first time. There's been a lot going on, and the problem is, I think the problem for any writer, if you're a good writer, I think you are very successful at lying to yourself, in the sense that the things that you write, you genuinely believe them. You are engaged in your fiction to a level that is more or less the same level that you give to, maybe not to the events in your actual life, but certainly to the events you see on the news and TV. You believe in what's in your book in a very real sense. It's quite difficult to get to that point. There are days when you're looking at it and it just blurs into text and you're like, this is just crap. And in order to reach that point where you've put yourself inside the fiction and you actually believe in it and it matters to you what happens to these characters because for you they are real, that's difficult, and you need. That's why I said it's very valuable to have peace of mind financially, because it enables you to sort of slip into that space. If you were always worried about maybe I need to take on some extra work somewhere so that I can pay the rent for the next 6 months, then I think it will be much harder to do that.
And do you think you have improved as a writer? Are there things that you find yourself doing more easily, or is each novel a completely different challenge?
No, I think I'm better now. I mean, I think I understand the craft better now. I mean, if you spend time doing something, you inevitably get better at it. I think I look back at Altered Carbon now, and it's a little bit embarrassing because it is a first novel, very, very unquestionably, and because of the Netflix thing, I am now actually doing quite a lot of work. I'm going back through the novel, looking at it, looking at the scripts, comparing. And I have had a few moments where I've been reading my own work from 15 years ago and going, ouch, that's a really bad sentence. Or just little things where you think, God, I really should have cleaned that up. It just doesn't work. But it doesn't pay to look back. You work on the book you're working on now. You've got to forget about your back catalogue. Let it go. Okay.
This one is from a student of mine who has this theory that all your novels belong in the same universe. That if you establish a single chronology, it works very well. So is he right?
No.
No?
No.
He's watching us. He'll be very sorry.
Is he? Oh, he's going to be broken-hearted. Yeah. No, I'm really sorry about that.
Have you checked?
Well, I'm under pressure to. Market Forces is a work apart. It has nothing to do with with the Kovacs universe or anything else I've written. It's a one-off, it's a standalone. Black Man was a standalone novel until recently, until I went on to work on the book I'm working on now, and had nothing to do with the Kovacs universe. In the Kovacs universe, by the time the events of Black Man would have happened, we had already discovered the alien civilization on Mars, cracked their technology and been able to start sending colony barges elsewhere. So I know people like this sense of continuity. It's people want to buy into an entire world and then see where all the bits fit in. But I'm afraid my work just doesn't fit that at all. I'll try. I mean, the next one is going to be in the universe of Black Man, so there'll be some consistency there. The fantasy trilogy is coherent across the 3 books. Some people say the fantasy trilogy is in the same universe as the Kovacs novels. I'm not going to answer that, except to say, in all honesty, I don't know.
Okay, so we might have a point after all. Okay, so tell me precisely about your combining science fiction and fantasy in your career. You've told us that you're writing a science fiction novel. So has your approach to this changed after writing the fantasy trilogy?
Not really. I mean, I think I've come back a little bit. I've come back a little bit older. Is one thing. I mean, the fantasy trilogy, I started writing it in 2008, and in that is 8 years ago, nearly 9 years ago. Actually, no, it's longer because the book was written before, so 2007. Yeah, we're looking at 9, maybe almost 10 years since I wrote science fiction. And that's a long time in anyone's life. I mean, in my life, it's been the difference between me living in Scotland and living in England, being a man with no children to becoming the father, going from being a man in his early 40s to being a man in his early 50s, being able to run 5 kilometers in the gym without a problem and not. There's a significant amount of personal change has happened in that time. So obviously I'm not the same man I was when I wrote the Kovacs books, and that's going to be reflected in the text, okay. There's no question. So what I've tried to do with the new book, with Thin Air, is I've tried to take an older man's approach. So the character is a bit more careful than Kovacs ever was, okay. A bit more world-weary. I think the tone is very similar to the Kovacs novels, but you will detect differences because, yeah, I'm not the same guy I was when I wrote those books.
Okay. I don't want to miss the chance to do this. I know that your own favorite novel is Black Man, so please tell them why they should read it.
It's my favourite novel because I think it's, of all the novels I've written, it's the one that I put the most into in terms of thinking about what I was writing about. I mean, the Kovacs books, there's a lot in them because I just vomited out everything that was in me, but they're not really, I wouldn't say they're about anything specific. They really are adventures which bring with them an enormous amount of sort of political and sociological, psychological baggage. Whereas Black Man was an idea rather than a story. I mean, I had the idea about this genetic modification and where it might go. And also the fact that I think, as often happens with science, but as we develop a new technology, it enables us to look back at what we have done before with a lot more clarity. I mean, I remember when I first saw a computer booting up after a restart, and it suddenly gave me this massive insight into when I had surgery on my wisdom teeth when I was a teenager, and they put me under general anesthetic, and then I woke up. And watching that computer boot up, I was thinking, fuck, that's it, that's what happens. Because yes, has anyone had general anesthetic? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You come round and you don't actually know, who you are, where you are, anything, and then yeah, basically the code gets sorted, and you go and you recuperate, you recover yourself in a series of steps, and it's exactly like rebooting. And I think that's the thing. Computer technology has given us a place to stand to look at that aspect of ourselves, consciousness. I don't think it's necessarily a good descriptor for consciousness, but it's a very good metaphor. It gives us a new metaphorical frame. Mm-hmm. And that's what science does. And my sense with Black Man was that by looking into this idea of gene codes and how we might tweak them, we're going to understand a lot more about our own gene code, the gene code that we're all stuck with and that we can't right now do anything about. Mm-hmm. So it was a book that there was a lot in it, I was thinking a lot in that book. because of that, it's perhaps not as fast-moving as some of the other stuff I've written. You do have to invest some time and effort. But there is a lot of sex and violence, so you'll be okay. Just keep at it, you'll be okay.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that that's something I've already told Richard Morgan frequently, that he's very demanding on readers, that he gives us a lot of information, and that his novels get much, much better in the second reading. So how should we prepare to read a Richard Morgan novel?
Oh, well, no, I'm not a Puritan. I mean, you should pick it up in the shop and read the first sort of 2-3 pages, and if they work for you, then you should buy it. You don't have to finish it after that. You just buy it, and that'll be fine.
But are you aware that you are this demanding, that you give your readers such a lot to consider? And
I never thought of it in those terms. I know that certainly I tend to just throw you in at the deep end and expect that you will be smart enough to swim. But it's a style, I mean, that's the only way I really know how to write. I mean, there are science fiction novels, and they are mostly dreadful, where, you'll have these characters having conversations about the technology, so they'll be, okay, we'd better use the curdle of a flip now. Yes, because, John, as you know, this device will allow us to open the portal and do something. For fuck's sake, man, everyone knows that. So and this is the big dilemma that any science fiction writer faces, and to some extent fantasy writers as well, that you're talking about stuff that's totally made up, but you've got to assume that the people in that world have a total familiarity with it. And I mean, no one says, okay, if you want to get to Gigamesh fast, I'll bring you in my car. A car is a vehicle with 4 wheels on it and an internal combustion engine that will enable us to go much faster than walking. No one does that. For me, it was a tenet of the style that you have to just go with it, throw the stuff in, and hope that people will keep up. But I have been told a few times that, rather abruptly, by comments on Reddit and so forth, saying, he didn't explain any of the technology. There's a strand also, I think, in less in science fiction, more in fantasy, but in both to some extent, of people who like systematization. So people who love the fact that, say, the magic in the book has a system, and you can learn the system. It was always a bit strange to me, because I always thought the whole point of magic is it doesn't have a system, because if it did, it would be science. The whole point about magic is you don't know what it is. It's a surprise. It's like, bah! But anyway, I think, again, there's a tendency within genre, there's a sort of a grouping of readers who like that systematization, and they are going to get on quite badly with a lot of my stuff. Yes, because I'm not explaining it. I'm going, well, you work out for yourself what that is. And if if it's really important, if it's something you can't understand the story without, then I will be at pains to make sure it's clear. But generally speaking, you throw stuff in, and it's like, if people get it, great, and if they don't get it, it doesn't really matter.
Do you think that as a science fiction writer, you have to be well informed about advances in science and technology? And of course, everyone is wondering, together with me, where the idea for the cortical stack came from.
Right, it certainly doesn't hurt to be well informed, but then I don't know that you need to be. I mean, the trick, this is the thing again that some of the hard SF end of the spectrum would disagree with me on and get quite upset about. Writing science fiction is not about deploying science, it's about tricking your readership. The science doesn't have to be believable, it just has to be convincing. And so you've got to pull this trick of making people think, yeah, this would work. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. One of them is to research very carefully into the existing science and then try to extrapolate it. I don't rate that one very highly. I don't think that's, because as I said, most people live in a world filled with stuff that they don't understand. So to me, it's not important that you understand the dynamics. But another way to do it is, yes, that you just go, you will believe this. You will believe that you can swap bodies because I tell you that you can. And that's in the writing, that's in the way you write, that's what convinces. In the same way that you will make someone care about a totally imaginary character, you will make someone believe that that this particular technology, yes, does exist and it does work. And it's a trick. It's that. So I don't worry too much about that. But sure, it doesn't hurt to be well informed. The cortical stacks really came out of black box recorders in airplanes. I mean, that's what I always thought, you know, the plane crashes, nothing survives except the black box, and the black box is designed specifically to survive a crash. That's what it's for. And it occurred to me, once I'd got the idea of digitized consciousness, and which obviously was a commonplace of science fiction, has been for many years. Once I had that, it was like, well, obviously you would put this into a safe place. Where would that safe place be? Well, somewhere close to your brain, probably, but not in your brain, because your brain might get destroyed. So, and you work your way down, and you think, yeah, about there should do it, and lock it inside the vertebrae, because bone is very, very strong stuff, doesn't easily get broken or decay. Away you go. You will believe that this is possible.
Okay. Let me tell the audience that I have for about 10 more minutes, okay, and then you can start the conversation with Richard. I don't want to miss my chance to grill you, finally. Okay, so, okay, that's a question about your gender politics, okay? Yes. I know. You have described yourself, at least to me, as a feminist, but with an essentialist view. You know that, you know, for you, men and women are different, okay? But I find you are one of the very few male writers who understands very well how patriarchy is oppressing everyone, both men and women, and I find in your novels very clear ideas about this, okay? Which I appreciate very much, particularly as a feminist. But you tend, okay, here's the but, okay? You tend to describe, to characterize your male heroes as monsters. No matter how attractive they are monsters. And here's my complaint, they are terribly individualistic, so they have this very clear-headed understanding of what's going on, which I think is very much your own. But then they stop short of doing something effective socially. They solve their own case, or not, and this is it. So my question is, why this individualism?
Well, I think primarily it makes a better story. Generally speaking, stories about a group of people working together in a friendly fashion to fix something over a long period of time are not that interesting to read. You know, it's very hard to tell that story well. It can be done, but it's very hard. We're not very interested in incremental change. We like sudden change. We like event and spectacle. And similarly, it's very hard to, you know, to be interested in the fortunes of an entire regiment of an army, say. I mean, I know that many books within genre will have a large dramatis personae. You know, I mean, Martin, obviously, a case in point. But they are all individuals, and we go to these individuals. That would be a very different thing than saying the hero of my book is the 32nd Airborne Division of the United States Army, all of it. I don't think people find that very interesting.
I'm not thinking in military terms, I'm thinking in terms of social justice. Your heroes, each of them has a cause, right? I mean, it might be capitalism or homophobia, but they do have a very clear cause, right? And they are raging because of that, but in the end you lead them to a point when, again, they solve a particular situation, but they do not spread the message of that something is wrong. Or is that the mission of your novels?
Well, I think the problem is that violence is a very strange thing, because there are two things that I think you can say truthfully of violence, and they seem to be totally opposed, but I don't think they're actually not. The first thing you can say is that violence doesn't solve anything. Okay. At the same time, you can say, yeah, actually, violence solves everything, and both of those are true, because violence will solve pretty much any problem you're faced with. Because you can take a violent recourse against whoever is your problem, and that's the end of them. At the same time, violence doesn't solve anything, as you say, in the larger social context, because it has repercussions. And if you take violent action, those repercussions will be felt. And they may not be felt by you, if you're lucky, but they'll be felt by other people. And so, if you're going to tell stories about violent protagonists, which, let's be honest, I like doing. I'm doing it
Clearly.
because I like those kinds of stories, and the people who read my books, I would guess, are the same. I think it always felt to me very dishonest to believe that you can just insert this violent hero into the context, have him do all the dirty work for you, and then step out again afterwards, and we're fine. Because that's just not a picture of how the world works. So I'm always at pains to try and show that you can take violent recourse, you know, and my characters often do, but there will always be a cost. There will always be a consequence for that. And as often as not, the consequence is sometimes worse than the thing that you're trying to cure. Because I am deeply conflicted about violence. as a male, I'm attracted to it. I like the idea of the capacity for violence, the ability to impose your will. I find that very attractive. I think most of us do, actually, male or female. But at the same time, I'm very well aware that from a broader, more social context, from looking at things from a non-individualist point of view, it's generally pretty counterproductive. And you somehow have to square that circle. Okay. As to the feminist thing, I mean, I don't see any good reason not to believe that men and women are significantly different at a genetic level, with everything that will then imply building upward from that. I don't think there's any cause to call that in terms of superiority, inferiority, whatever. It is simply difference. It's not very good news, but I don't think just because it's bad news we can afford to ignore it. And I think there is a big difference between accepting something and accepting that something is there. Mm-hmm. So I think you can be a feminist, you can accept that the genetic differences are there, but it doesn't mean that you accept them as a way of being. Mm-hmm. The issue is most women will probably not be drawn to professions of violence like the military or frontline police units, but some women will. And we lose something if we just make a blanket decision. No, women are not drawn to this kind of work, therefore we won't let them do it. Mm-hmm. It's a ridiculous failure to understand the diversity that exists, and it's a waste of resources. But at the same time, it's ridiculous to say women are exactly like men when it comes to violence, and there's no reason why just as many women wouldn't go into frontline combat positions as men, because that's patently not the case. You know, so what I'm in favour of doing is acknowledging the bad news and then looking to do something about it. Okay. Genetically, it's very clear that men grow hair on their faces. But we don't therefore say, well, that's it, you're all going to have beards, guys. We invent some way of fixing it. We invent razors. And similarly, we have the social technology to begin to work at this difference. Looking at women, for example, most women will want to have a family. And will end up probably caring for that family. Most men, well, yeah, maybe not. And even if they do, they can shuffle it off on their wife to handle the heavy lifting. Now, if you want men and women in equal numbers in the workplace, it's no good pretending that difference doesn't exist. You've got to accept it exists and then look at what you can do about it. So one thing would be to change working practices. So when you're hiring someone who's a woman, you don't go, oh fuck, don't hire her because she's just going to want to have a baby in 5 years. Mm-hmm. You go, okay, hire her, and she can go and have her child in 5 years' time, and she can work part-time or do whatever we allow in the company in terms of that, and she can come back after she's raised the kid to school age, and then we re-adopt her in a different role to go on, or even in the same role. We have to look at the dynamics that actually exist, and then look for ways to make that work for us in the way we want to. But that's very different than looking at the dynamics that exist and then closing our eyes and going, la, 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 I'm not listening, which I think, unfortunately, has been the tendency of the left generally over the last sort of 50 to 100 years.
I'm thinking how to rephrase my next question, because you're sort of answered it, but not yet, and this is going to be my last promise. Okay. So you are not afraid of, sort of being politically incorrect, and you showed this by choosing a black man as your very violent hero. You have a gay hero who's also extremely violent, okay, and I see you're very fond of violent heroes. And I was thinking there are two ways out of this problem. Either your next hero is a woman who's not afraid of being violent, and I think you already have Carmen Ren in Black Man who might more or less go in that direction, or you go with someone like Arkev, who I think is possibly your best female character, your most accomplished female character, who definitely is not violent in the same way. I don't know if you've ever contemplated the idea of breaking yet another boundary. I'm going to have a violent female hero.
Well, it has been done quite a lot. Admittedly, often it's done very badly. I've got some violent female characters coming up in the next book. There will be a few of them. I think the issue really is also that it's what you were really looking at here is not so much violence as competence. And I think maybe that's the thing that we respect, rather than just strength, because strength is a fairly basic concept. I think what we respect is competence, the ability to handle things. Unfortunately, especially in books like mine, the things that need to be handled usually involve competence in physical violence. So there are ways, I mean, I got a lot of flack when I wrote the fantasy trilogy because the women tended to be sort of powerful wives who sort of manipulated politically in order to get what they wanted.
You mean like Carla in Market Forces or so?
As well, yeah, and the sense that the women were not given the agency that the male characters were given. But to me, that just seemed an obvious commonplace of the world I was describing. But in the end, I don't really see why there's a problem with a woman using her manipulative powers behind the scenes to get what she wants. I don't see how that's somehow not acceptable, whereas using a great big fuck-off battle axe to chop your enemies' heads off is acceptable. That's the curious thing. It's almost like we validate the axe wielding as that's a cool thing to do, which, it is fictionally. We validate that, and then we therefore look at these other strategies, and we go, oh yeah, but you're not giving her the agency. But then at the same time, we're insisting that women have other ways of moving in the world and achieving things. I think the left needs to sit down and have a very serious conversation with itself about this, and both within genre and in more general context, and to sort of butt heads with reality and go, well, how do you want to handle this? Because at the moment, they're not handling it. They're touching it with fingers that are scared to get burned. So I think I'm rambling now, so I'm going to stop.
I think we can now take questions from the floor.
Who's ready? Do you want to compare them?
I think we have a question there. We're doing fine.
So we know you have worked on cross-media, and we know you have changed in the last 10 years, and you're given the chance to work again on Altered Carbon. Altered Carbon for the TV show that you're working on.
I should add there, Sara was being a little bit overkind there when she said I was working on it as a screenwriter. I have an advisory role. The contractual terms of the deal say that I come in as a consultant. So I can look at the scripts, I can make suggestions, I can sort of say, I think maybe these lines don't go in the direction you want to go. But I'm being treated very much as an honoured guest rather than a crew member. It's in the end they bought it, it's their ball to run with, and I'm simply there offering help if they want it. It's for theirs to do with as they wish. So I am involved, but not to the extent that maybe some people think.
Do they already have an actor to play Takeshi Kovacs?
Oh yes, yeah. The whole of the first season is cast.
Can you tell the name or?
Yeah. I think some of you will know. I think it's a guy called Joel Kinnaman. Joel Kinnaman. Yes. He's sorry?
Joel,
he was the new RoboCop. He was
RoboCop.
in Suicide Squad as well.
Okay.
He's been in a bunch of TV shows.
Okay.
I especially liked him in the American version of The Killing. I didn't like the American version of The Killing at all, and I thought he was the thing that redeemed it. Because he was from the moment he appeared on screen, he had these very hollow eyes, and he just looked, and you're thinking, stay away from this guy.
Well, what I wanted to ask is, how do you feel about revisiting, like going back to the Altered Carbon? How do you feel about it, like looking back at it, like you said that you will change some lines from the original book? Do you feel like TV is going to fit more, like the story you wanted to tell at the time is going to be different?
I think, I'm in a very privileged position because what I get to do is to sit back in my armchair and watch a group of very talented people run in the directions they think it should go. And I get to say to them, if I don't like the direction, I get to say, I don't think you should do that. And if they do it and it doesn't work out, I can go, ha, told you so. So I'm in a position of enormous privilege. I'm doing none of the heavy lifting, and I still get to have a say. Revisiting the book has been interesting. As I said, stylistically, I've had a few moments of, oh dear, that's really just not very good, is it? But I would hope that, I would have been a bit worried if I'd gone back and read it and thought, shit, this is still the best book I've ever written.
Are you doing the chapter in the valley in el Valle de los Caídos? That's in Altered Carbon, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And are you from? Is there going to be a scene from there? Or?
I don't know. I don't think so. Because I think the way they've constructed the world is somewhat different. But to be honest with you, that was a completely gratuitous swipe at Francoism. I was living in Spain at the time. I'd been up to the Valle de los Caídos and been horrified by what I found there, and I was just looking for a way to kick, And it's like, oh, well, he's in San Francisco. Fuck it. We put him in a suborbital. We bring him here so he emote about this, and then we'll bring him back again. You know, I mean, it's totally gratuitous. It really was.
Let's get more questions, please. Here at the front, here at the front.
Mi pregunta va más relacionada con el proceso creativo. Para ti, ¿qué sucede primero? ¿Piensas en una trama y luego construyes un personaje? ¿O sucede al contrario? Primero piensas en un personaje y construyes una trama para él.
Diría, do we all speak Spanish in here?
You should go back to English.
I'm going to have to go in English, but
Yes.
stop me if you're not getting something. She asked me whether I start with characters and then build a story around them, or whether I start with some kind of story and then put the characters into it. I think it's probably the former of the two. I think I start with the characters, or at least the characters and the situation. So very often what will occur to me is a scene. There's two people sitting in an all-night diner talking, maybe, or you know, a guy walking through the door and shouting at somebody. You know, that's the kind of stuff that occurs to me on a basic inspirational level. And then you kind of, well, as I said in Aviles about 6 months ago, so I often think of myself as a dung beetle, escarabajo pelletero. In that I get this stuff and I'm kind of rolling it along, and it gets bigger and bigger. Eventually I have enough shit that I can start to do something with it. And yeah, that is very often the way I work. And at first I thought I was some kind of freak, but the more I read interviews with other authors, I realize that that's actually quite a common tendency. We do seem to be divided into two broad types. There are the planners and there are the improvisers. And they say that, or you could say that there are the planners and the architects and the dung beetles. And I'm definitely a dung beetle. Does that answer it? Yeah.
¿Piensas que, más allá de los autores, hay unas diferencias que hay diferencias que permiten identificar que la ciencia ficción británica es una cosa y la ciencia ficción americana es diferente, incluso aunque sean las dos en inglés? Quizás la británica toca más temas sociales y la otra más temas de imperios o más temas militares. ¿Qué piensas de esto?
There are definitely tendencies within American SF and within British SF, and obviously they're coming from different cultural places, so they will exhibit difference. But I think this difference is probably exaggerated a bit, because, I mean, first of all, thing to realize is I exist when I'm not making money elsewhere. I exist on my American royalties, not my British royalties. I mean, my books sell well in America, apart from market forces. And there's certainly a large number of Americans who like what I'm doing. So I don't think it's that. And also the other thing to remember is that if you look at anyone in Britain who is writing dystopian science fiction, there's a very good chance they've been influenced by American dystopian writers. I mean, Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451, it's pure American, but it is extremely dystopic. Gibson, the whole cyberpunk movement was almost entirely Americans. I mean, Gibson lived in Canada by then, but he was still American by birth. And I still think, despite having lived there most of his adult life, he is very driven by American. The things that he's angry about seem to be things that are rooted in America more than Canada. So we kind of cross-fertilize. And it's true that, yeah, you've got this kind of brash, white guys in space opera stuff in America that does very well. But then again, in Britain you have a guy like Peter F. Hamilton, who writes great big widescreen SF space opera, and it does very, very well. I mean, I wish I had his sales. I mean, Peter sells really well. So I don't think it's as clear as a lot of commentators would say. But yes, very clearly there are different cultural bases, and they cause different currents in the water, if you like. But then you'll find that there are, you know, a wide diversity of guys writing, and they will take from that what they want. I mean, Paolo Bacigalupi, you couldn't ask for a more European novel than The Wind-Up Bird, really, could you? It's very, very European, I think, in the way it's put together. So I don't think I think the difference is there, but I think it's it's variegated. It's
Do you think, can you tell, I mean, if you read a book and you don't know who's the author, where the author is from, do you think you could tell this is American and this is British?
Well, yeah, but you're cheating because usually you can do it from the way the characters speak and little keywords, things like sidewalk, you know.
But
it
would be the language tricks, not the
not really.
the theme or
not
the
really. I
situation
mean,
or
I
anything.
think what you see is the cultural thing. Again, Kelly Link, for example, I don't think she writes in a specifically American style, but the things that she writes about tend to be quintessentially American. I mean, the characters and the places that they live are very American. None of them feel like a British context. She did actually write one short story in her first collection that was set in Edinburgh because she happened to be there at the time. It worked very well. I mean, you know.
So what about Scottish precisely? Because you were based in Glasgow for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, if you read someone like Ian Banks, could you tell just like that's a Scottish guy, or Ken MacLeod or someone?
I think there is definitely a sort of a darker current running through Scottish thinking than English thinking. The English, especially the Southern English, do, and these are huge generalizations, okay, so please don't get offended. The English the Southern English especially, tend to have a very sort of workmanlike, pragmatic, broadly optimistic kind of outlook on things. Let's get stuff done, you know. It's not as strong as the Americans. I mean, in America, that is taken to the nth degree, which I quite like, actually. I mean, I get tired of all the moaning in Europe sometimes. Sort of, oh, it's too, oh, no. But, you know, the New World, America, Australia, places like that, it's full of people who just go, fuck, we better fix that then. So yeah, the Scots, there's much more, I mean, it's a little bit, to that extent, I guess it's the Celtic thing, and it's maybe analogous somewhat to Irish culture as well. There are the much darker currents running, and a sense of, you know, oppression, injustice, that to be fair, they have every right to, because I think that's the other thing. I think the English have, you know, spent a couple of centuries running the greatest empire the world has ever known, and God, does it show in our behaviour now. I mean, you know, that's defined us in a way that it's crippling us now. And you don't see that if you go north of the border to Scotland. Generally speaking, there's a much more sanguine attitude to geopolitics than there is. You know, the Scots voted 62% in favour of staying in the European Union, which is almost exactly the opposite figure for England. So there are, yeah, again, there's a definite cultural trend, and I think Scottish science fiction it does tend to exhibit some quite dark corners that you maybe don't see as much in the English stuff. I haven't really read enough of each to be able to draw any kind of basic conclusion, but yeah, there's a nice cynicism in Scottish writing as well, which I enjoy. Then again, you've got Ian Banks, who is sunny, enthusiastic, optimistic, you know. So that's the problem. It's like all stereotypes, isn't it? As soon as you start to try to apply it with rigor, it starts to break down. You know, you find the exceptions.
We take more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully a quick one. Now that you're working on this TV show about altered carbon, have you ever thought of rewriting it?
No. I have got more than enough work to do just delivering the books that I owe to my publisher already without going back and rewriting the ones that are already done. No chance.
That's an easy one. What are your thoughts on fan fiction? Because you know that there is a lot of fan fiction of Altered Carbon out there.
I didn't know that, actually, no.
There are a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any strong feelings about fan fiction. It's interesting because there are writers who do. I know a number of writers who are absolutely furious about it, you know. They feel that it's a kind of someone stealing something from them. It's a sort of pornography of their work, which sometimes it is. Let's be honest. But I don't know. I don't really mind. I mean, in a way, I suppose it's a kind of flattery, isn't it? It would be like if I stumbled on a story one day that described me having sex with somebody, and how muscular and stallion-like I was. You know, you can't really get upset about something like that, can you? So I mean, yeah, I don't really mind. I mean, if people, the only thing for me, it always feels to me as if I look at it and I don't go looking for it, but every now and then I have stumbled upon it, and every now and then I will look at it and I'll think, well, the thing is, if you can write like this, why aren't you writing your own stuff? Why don't you go away and write something of your own? Wouldn't that be much more satisfying? Now, obviously, the answer to that is no. It wouldn't, otherwise these people would do that. But I do sometimes feel that it's a bit of a waste, that there are all these people out there who will have some level, okay, some of them have no talent at all, but there are a bunch of people out there who have writing talent, and with a bit of practice and learning could maybe be very good writers, and they seem content to inhabit other people's worlds, and that to me feels wrong. Not wrong in a moral way or anything, it just feels, I feel like, you shouldn't be doing this. You should go away and have a think and come up with something. And okay, maybe it won't be hugely original. Maybe it'll be a very, a standard dystopic cyberpunk type future that looks a lot like one of mine. But that's fine. I mean, I did that. I borrowed Gibson's, themes and colours, and there's a lot of neon in Altered Carbon that I owe directly to William Gibson. There's nothing wrong with stealing from people. I mean, it's how artists survive. So I always sort of feel a little bit uneasy in that sense. I kind of think, guys, shouldn't you be like writing for real? But if not, fine. It's a form of response. It sort of sends the signal. I read your book and I really liked it so much. I'm going to imitate it, which is nice. I'm pretty cool about it, really.
I have this typical question that nobody's asking, so I'll ask it. Tell me about writing for different media. Is there an essential difference between writing novels, graphic novels, video games, and so on?
Oh, hell yes. Yeah, there is. For anyone who's an aspiring writer out there, just so they know, writing for games will smash your ego into a million little pieces, because if you're writing for games, you are not the gig. The gig is the game, and you are just providing underwiring to support the game. On the other hand, it does pay well. Writing for comics is a lot easier than writing prose, but it's limited. It's limited in the sense of what you can achieve. It's also limited in the sense of what you'll be allowed to achieve, because it is an industry that's kind of locked up. It's quite hard to get stuff out there that is unusual or off the sort of the main drag. I wish it weren't. I think we're moving. I think comics do seem to be opening up a little bit. There seem to be more indie things coming out now. There does seem to be a move towards a more like the Japanese model, where you've got manga for every possible demographic, for men, women, young girls, old guys. It doesn't matter. There's manga for whoever you are. There's manga for you. And I think we're lurching very slowly towards that in the West, but it is painfully slow. And again, most of the money tends to be located in, if you want to make money in comics, well, go write for Marvel, go write for DC. This is where the money is to be made. Writing your own little comics is a lot harder as a road. If you're a writer, you should be able to do all of those, and screenwriting as well. Again, no problem with that. The only thing with screenwriting and TV writing is that, for me, it lacks a payoff, because you're not really creating something. You're drawing up the plans for something that someone else will create for you, or that you will help to create. And that's never quite as satisfying as creating your own thing. When you've finished a novel, that's it. You've got it. Even if no one ever reads it, you've got it, and you put it under your bed and keep it. I had a couple of novels like that, actually. With a screenplay, it isn't anything until someone has taken it and turned it into a movie. It doesn't stand on its own.
I think perhaps the way to go is what Alex Garland did with Ex Machina. There, he wrote the screenplay and had control over the film. You never thought of that. I'm going to write a screenplay and have full control of. Yeah,
it took him. First he had to become a bestseller with novels.
Okay.
Then he had to decide it wasn't what he wanted and pay back his advance to the publisher. Okay. Then he had to get someone to make a movie of his book and become friends with them. And then he had to pitch his ideas to them. It was a long road for Alex Garland, to Ex Machina, I mean. Mm-hmm. He's been doing interesting things, but I think it would be a mistake to look at Alex Garland's career path and think, oh, I'll do that. Because it would not be easy to have that much luck, I think, not sequentially.
near the end of the session. Any more questions?
Come on, guys.
There's one there. Two?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 5
We can
minutes.
do
So
both of these
two-
and maybe one more, yeah.
Yeah, 2 questions, perhaps one more.
I just have a question about your background as a historian rather than as a scientist. When you write science fiction, are you thinking is the history is what pops out and then you find the science to go with it? Or does it, is there, I know you said you weren't a planner, but there has to be something where you're thinking, okay, my reader doesn't have to understand this. Do you have to understand the science that you're writing about?
Yeah, I mean, the science has to, like I said, it has to be convincing, and obviously the first person it has to convince is me. If I can be convinced by it, then I've got a good chance of convincing the reader. The history thing, yeah, I mean, I think history is very much underrated as a tool in science fiction. If you read a lot of, well, you don't have to read a lot of history, actually. If you read some history, you will see all sorts of interesting patterns emerging. And it's also in constant flux as different theories of how history works come along. And certainly, yes, when I was putting together the sort of the background for the Protectorate in the Kovacs novels, it's not that I planned it out in any great detail, but I was using the furniture of history, if you like. I would throw in the name of a battle that had been significant, because very often when you look back through history, these are the things. You go, well, there was this battle, which was a very significant turning point for this part of the world. And I looked at colonial America and how it had unfolded, and I took some cues from that. At one point, Bancroft says to Kovacs, she says, you come from a colonial culture and it's brash and forward thrusting and you're not hidebound with rules and moral codes the way we are back on Earth. And I think I borrowed a little bit from this sense that, yes, America, when it was freshly independent, did seem to have this sort of raw dynamism to it that maybe you wouldn't find if you went back to Europe and wandered around London and Paris and places like that. So, but again, it's more like a seasoning. It's a device for seasoning the dish. I wouldn't say I draw hugely on it at all. Oh, and sorry, in the fantasy, again, very handy because you're looking to sort of create dynamics for your imagined civilization. And you can reach back into history and just go, right, it's going to be a little bit like the Byzantine Empire. This is going to be a little bit like the steppe nomads of so and so. This will be a bit like the Native Americans circa 1000 AD. You can borrow like very, very, very quickly and effectively, and sort of put together. It's like macros in programming. You don't have to spend a lot of time evolving it. You can just go, it's a bit like that. I mean, my steppe nomads in The Steel Remains and the books that followed, I basically just took a bunch of stuff I knew about Vikings and another bunch of stuff I knew about Mongols, and I just threw it into the mix. And then one day I ran into a guy who is a historian, and he said to me, I really loved the Viking and Mongol influences in your bingo. Right?
Okay, I'm really sorry, but I'm told that this is it, that we have to finish at this point. I think that Richard will be around this afternoon and possibly tomorrow.
All of tomorrow and maybe even some of Monday.
Okay, and well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Sara.